To no one's surprise, ASM is still crap, so I'm going to carry on with my own story, because I genuinely think I can do better than these quote-unquote professionals at Marvel. But I don't want to do it alone. I want other people to make up their own runs and stories. We can treat our favourite characters with more respect than Marvel ever will. Volume 2, Fear and Loathing in New York. Previously, Peter Parker and Mary Jane discovered that their friend Liz Osborn wants their help to murder Spider-Man. Meanwhile, the Webhead's more regular enemies, the Shocker and Mysterio, teamed up with plans to form their own villainous gang, composed of the criminal element without superpowers. Issue 5, and we start in Hell's Kitchen, where a plume of smoke bellows out of the local firehouse. But it's not the grey smoke usually accompanying fire, it's a sickly neon green. The firefighters inside the building are suddenly overcome with panic, scrambling over each other, scratching at the walls, screaming bloody murder. They're so panicked they can't even use the door handle right, so one of them takes a fire axe to it. The madness doesn't end just because they escape the building. In their hysteria, the demented firemen start swinging wildly at the innocent people outside the station. One chops the axe down right into a young woman, but a man leaps from the crowd and catches the blade. It's Peter Parker. Everyone's too busy rushing to watch Pete, so he's comfortable quickly using his web shooters to capture the fireman before anyone is hurt. Besides, the most anyone would glean is that he's got brown hair and an average build, and he's not going to worry about his secret identity if people are going to get hurt, is he? This is a fact that the villain atop the adjacent building curses as he watches what he wrought. Mr. Fear. The police turn up and Peter gets away clean, while wondering if Mary Jane's part of today's plan is going as well as his. Mary Jane, Liz, and her kids are all at Coney Island for a day of fun that Mary Jane hopes will snap Liz out of a revenge fantasy. But while the kids, Normie and Stanley, are out of earshot, Liz confronts MJ to say what she wants to say and get it over with. Mary Jane cuts the crap and tells Liz that she can't kill Spider-Man, despite what she thinks he's a hero who saved them personally many times. But Liz doesn't listen. She reiterates to MJ that it's either Liz or Spider-Man. Both cannot continue living. Mary Jane's attempt failed, and Liz reveals that her plot has actually already begun. Peter is still wondering what the hell that was about at the firehouse when he arrives at his destination. The law officers of Nelson and Murdoch. After recruiting the Molten Man to help stop Liz, Peter and Mary Jane decided to hold an intervention, and Mark had told Peter about Liz's old romance with Foggy Nelson. Back at the disrupted firehouse, the scent of fear still lingers in the air as Daredevil, the man without fear, investigates. As he runs his fingers over some gas masks, he recognises the stench of the chemicals and his jaw clenches. Mr. Fear is back in town, but that's not the only chemical he can sense. A familiar hint of a certain adhesive gives Daredevil a little smile. After passing some friendly-looking tenants in the halls, Peter meets with Foggy and explains the situation, and of course Foggy's willing to help. Peter says thanks and asks if he knows anyone else who might be able to help them, and Foggy considers asking his law partner when he returns, but he's a little bit busy right now. Foggy extends his hand for a shake, and Peter takes it in his own, just as the spider sense blares, and the entire building is enveloped in a neon green cloud of fear gas. Things move in a blur, and Foggy doesn't know exactly what the hell just happened, but he knows enough. He knows Peter Parker had lunged at him and threw both of them out of the second-story window. He knows Peter had carefully placed Foggy on the ground before running off. And now he knows that that's Spider-Man up there, crawling back into the building to save the people within. The stench of fear hits Spider-Man immediately as he feels his way through the smoke. He can hear faint whispers calling him, only they're calling his real name. Suddenly one shouts, "Peter!" right as a man with a kitchen knife slashes out, barely missing. Spidey can see the lunacy in the man's eyes as he shoots his webs, sticking his hands together. But this fella's not the only terrorised tenant. Another fear-gassed civilian lunges out, screaming like a loon. Spider-Man remembers these people from the way in. They're just regular people, so he's got no choice but to non-violently detain them with his webs. Suddenly the whispers shout again. A chair smashes against Spidey's head. The faces of the civilians start shifting, changing from everyday New Yorkers to the men of Peter's nightmares. Green Goblin, Carnage, Craven, Harry Osborn. The fear gas has taken effect. Peter knows this can't be real, but his heart is still thundering. He's trying not to panic, but that's hard when your brain's screaming at you. His webs pacify the madmen, but his own mind won't shut up. He can still hear the voices of his enemies laughing at him as he clasps his hands to his ears. He's positive the noise will drive him mad. Then, a blood-red figure emerges from the neon smoke. It's Daredevil, wearing a gas mask from the station and with a spare for Spidey. Issue 6. Daredevil helps Spider-Man limp out of the building, and the two regroup on an adjacent rooftop as paramedics and police enter the fear-bombed building. Spider-Man mentions he's never felt such panic in his life, and that was just fighting civilians. Daredevil explains. Early that morning, the office of Nelson and Murdoch had received a tape-recorded message for Daredevil from Mr. Fear. He's gonna choke the life out of Hell's Kitchen with his upgraded fear gas, unless Daredevil stops him. Fear seems to be out for Daredevil's blood, but Daredevil's not gonna go down without a fight. Daredevil hands Peter the tape recorder, and when Spider-Man hits play, it speaks Fear's message. A threat to Daredevil that once his new formula enters a person's bloodstream, it's sure to eventually kill its victims, unless the antidote is administered. And the only way Fear's gonna give up the antidote is in exchange for Daredevil's head. Spidey and DD spend the day tearing through Hell's Kitchen in search of Fear, starting with his old known associates. Spider-Man asks Daredevil who Fear really is, and Daredevil sighs that it's complicated. Mr. Fear is a title that many have claimed over the years, but he suspects it's the third man of the legacy, Larry Cranston. But still, to be safe, they tackle anyone who's ever been tied to any version of Fear, including Ox of the Enforcers, and the Eel, who after a beating reveals he offered Fear a team-up that the villain embarrassingly declined. Feeling like Fear thinks he's too good for him, Eel is happy to spill where he found Fear. The Oak Hill Cemetery. The sun begins to set as Spider-Man and Daredevil make their approach, and when they set foot on the land, Daredevil notices something. He can hear their footsteps on the earth, as if it were hollow. Someone's dug out a small labyrinth in the dirt beneath the gravestones. A spooky hideout for Mr. Fear. A loose headstone sensed by Matt opens up a secret hatch, and the heroes jump down into the darkness. At first, Daredevil can't sense anything suspicious, but then his radar picks up another heartbeat. Maneuvering through the catacombs of dirt, the two come to a huge hole in the wall that leads to the subway, specifically to an abandoned railway line. And on the line sits an old-styled ghost train loaded with neon green glowing chemicals. Spider sense tingles and Peter reaches out his open palms, catching two strange black pellets. But then the little balls explode into neon green. Spider-Man is swallowed by terror as Mr. Fear laughs dramatically atop his train. He reminds the heroes of his message as Spider-Man falls to his knees and asks Daredevil if he's ready to surrender in exchange for the survival of Fear's victims. But the only response he gets is a billy club to the face. Daredevil fights Fear as Spider-Man unsuccessfully coughs the toxin out of his lungs, and here is where Fear's true trap is sprung. He clicks a button on the throat of his mask, and his echoed voice booms in the miniature catacombs. Kill Daredevil. Peter's eyes bulge beneath his mask as the figure of Daredevil suddenly shifts into a monster. Peter's fight or flight response kicks in and he throws a punch at Daredevil that the man without fear barely dodges. Mr. Fear's new equipment lets him control the fears of his victims and their responses to sudden stress. Spider-Man sluggishly attacks Daredevil as Mr. Fear boards his ghost train with a chuckle.
I gave you a chance to surrender, Daredevil, and your refusal has doomed New York. My ghost train shall run rampant along the railway, pumping my fear gas, infecting every commuter, and eventually, the entire city.
Issue 7. Fear's train departs with a jaunty toot as the fear-afflicted Spider-Man tries to take off Daredevil's head. Matt has no chance against Peter, but luckily, the toxin is slowing Spidey down enough for Matt to just barely keep out of reach. From Peter's point of view, he isn't fighting Daredevil in these catacombs. He's in an old, musty warehouse, fighting Dennis Carradine, the burglar who killed Uncle Ben. Peter's greatest fear takes hold, the fear of failing to save someone because he chose not to act. Peter's fingers wrap around the burglar's throat, but it's Matt Murdock's voice that strains out. Every blink Peter takes switches the scene from Matt to Carradine and back again. But as his panicked heart pumps his radioactive spider blood through his body, the fear toxin within soon dissipates. Gasping for air as his heart rate returns to normal, Spidey comes to his senses. Daredevil sighs in relief, and Spidey feels like crap, but both know they can't stop and rest with fear on the loose. Cut to the nearest subway station as a haunting choo-choo echoes from down the tunnel. Mr. Fear's nightmare engine rushes past, spewing out its neon nightmare gas. Commuters' coughs turn to screams. From the conductor's seat, Fear laughs deviously, but then he sees something scary. Spider-Man swinging through the tunnels with Daredevil on his back, and they're catching up. As they approach, Spider-Man shouts over the roar of Fear's engine, asking Matt how he's going to cure the people already infected. Peter assumes his radioactive blood had burned the toxin out, but the other victims don't have that. Daredevil just tells Peter not to worry about it, as they approach Fear's caboose. They need to stop this train now, before more people get caught in the toxin cloud. Spidey drops Daredevil through the window to handle Fear, as he lands on the front of the train and spins his webs. Fear scoffs at Daredevil. He's surprised that he'd be so cold. Had he simply surrendered, Fear would have administered the antidote to the victims and Daredevil would have been the only one to die. Daredevil shuts Fear up with a kick to the stomach. He can sense that Fear was lying about all of it. His new toxin strain isn't permanent. The panic passes naturally. Spidey's blood just sped up the chemical's dissipation for him. The victims will live after they've sweated out. It was all a con to try and kill Daredevil without a fight. The train buckles under Spidey's webbing right as it emerges from the underground tunnels onto the elevated rail. It brutally derails and crashes to the road below, causing a canister of toxin to explode, releasing a billowing cloud of fear smoke that envelops Spidey, Daredevil, Fear, and several civilians who had stopped to gawk at the crash. People start to scream. Spider-Man feels the toxin take effect again. He's suddenly transported from the streets back to that warehouse. Fear becomes Uncle Ben, and Daredevil becomes the burglar. Emerging from the crash with a limp, Mr. Fear glares at Daredevil.
You know what annoys me the most? I've been dripping fear gas this whole fight and yet you're still unaffected. What the hell are you?
To which Daredevil replies with a scowl. A man without fear. Daredevil may be fearless, but the other people here certainly do have fears. Fears he can manipulate. Mr. Fear's ghostly echoed voice seizes control of their souls as he commands them. Kill Daredevil. The civilians suddenly swarm the horn-headed hero. He lets loose his grapple, but is dived upon by the people. The savage civilians start beating Daredevil to death as the man without fear can neither escape nor hurt these innocents. Spider-Man's on his hands and knees as he tries to shake Nightmare from reality. Mr. Fear sits down beside Spider-Man with glee as he watches the people kill Daredevil for him. Within Spidey's head, he's still hallucinating Ben's death, and he hears his uncle's voice of disappointment for letting him down. Peter's greatest fear is not living up to the responsibility that comes with his powers. But then, even while caught in this grip of terror, Peter has an epiphany. Peter realises he learned long ago to never let others suffer because he wouldn't act. And he knows in his heart that he'd never make that mistake again. Even at the start of this fearful adventure, he went into action maskless to pacify the infected because people were about to get hurt. And he didn't hesitate to save Foggy Nelson, even though he knew Foggy would realise who he really was. Through his own self-confidence, Spidey overcomes the fear gas, and Mr. Fear's glee turns to horror as a webbed fist breaks his jaw. As Daredevil's enveloped in the brawl of infected innocents, Spider-Man grabs his hand and pulls him free from the pile. A web cartridge smashes on the ground at the people's feet, exploding into a sticky mess that'll keep them from hurting anyone until the toxin wears off. Spider-Man and Daredevil are victorious. An hour later, the heroes watch from the rooftops as the innocents are helped into ambulances and Fear is thrown into a paddy wagon. Spider-Man asks Matt if he can help with Liz Allen's intervention, and though Matt admits he doesn't know her as well as Foggy does, he of course agrees, and he tells Spider-Man, no matter what, he'll always have his back. Mr. Fear twitches in pain at the back of the police van as it drives him to the nearest holding cell, but a sudden blinding mist wrapping around the van means Fear will never arrive there. Mysterio appears, with sarcastic applause. Through his broken jaw, Fear utters a swear word. Mr. Fear failed his initiation, so he just wants Mysterio to let him wallow in his defeat. But Mysterio tuts, like he's never lost a fight before. Fear put on a good show, and so Mysterio offers him his hand and membership into the gang. The van arrives at the lockup, but upon opening the back doors, the officers are shocked to find it empty. Issue 8, The Intervention. 2 days after Fear's arrest, Peter, Matt, Foggy and Mark Raxton sit in silence in Liz's apartment. Peter asks Mark if he saves much money on heating during the winter, but Molten Man doesn't respond. Finally, the door opens and in walks Mary Jane and Liz. She immediately knows what's happening. They know of her plan to kill Spider-Man and they can't let her go through with it. Peter goes first because as far as Liz knows, he's got the most experience with Spidey. And he tells her how he's known Spidey a long time and though he doesn't always like him, he understands how important he is to the city. Next goes Mark, who tells Liz he knows what it's like to want to kill Spider-Man. But when he looks at it from a different perspective, he sees how much good Spider-Man's done. He reminds Liz of Harry Osborn's disturbing family dinner where he held them all hostage, and reminds her how they were saved that day by Spider-Man. Mary Jane brings up how there's been lots of times Spider-Man has saved Liz or people close to her. When Angelo Fortunato became Venom and attacked their school reunion, Spider-Man saved them. When Flash Thompson was framed by the Hobgoblin, Spider-Man saved him. Even when her own son Normie was kidnapped by his grandfather and bonded to the Carnage symbiote, Spider-Man saved him. She can't deny that Spider-Man's had a positive role in her life as well. After a while, Liz eases up and even starts smiling at the stories. Eventually, she relents, telling them she knows deep down she can't kill Spider-Man. The group are all relieved, except for Matt Murdock. Soon, Peter sees Matt, Foggy and Mark out at the door, but before he leaves, Matt gives Peter some grim news. Liz was lying, and when Peter returns to the living room, he sees just how much. Liz has pulled a gun from her handbag and holds the barrel to her own head. Mary Jane and Peter just stare as tears start to drop down Liz's cheeks. She thought Peter and MJ were her friends, the only friends that she had left. And now they've betrayed her. If they're against her, she might as well just kill herself, right now. Peter and Mary Jane beg Liz not to, but she'll only stop on one condition. They swear to help her kill Spider-Man, and after a shared, panicked glance to each other, they understand they have no choice. They promise. Shakily, Liz puts down the gun and tells them she's happy to hear it, because she's already recruited another member to their cause, and he's due to meet them here any moment. A knock on the window draws the trio's attention to the man clinging to the wall outside Liz's apartment. Enter the Scorpion. To me, Spider-Man and Daredevil are Marvel's best crime-fighting duo, so I really wanted to establish their friendship early on, because we're going to be seeing a lot of Daredevil in this run, and I think I've characterised him quite respectfully here. Mr. Fear is badass, but I'm afraid I might have made him too similar to Scarecrow from Batman. But at the same time, Scarecrow's like the coolest supervillain ever, so that's not really a bad thing. Can you tell I've been playing Arkham Knight recently? I love when villains have fun with their jobs, so giving Fear a ghost train, in my mind, was a great move, and I think I've paid respect to Peter in the way he overcomes the fear gas. He's learned his lesson about power and responsibility, and not even debilitating terror can make him forget it. So while Mysterio keeps recruiting, Liz seems to be building a crew of her own. What does the sinister Scorpion want? And how can Peter get out of this mess? Maybe we'll find out in the next arc. To trust a Scorpion.